awesome. We're here live at MedTech conference, live in Toronto, and we got Venk.
Awesome.
Thanks, Randy.
Welcome, Venk.
Happy to be here.
So tell us, who are you? What do you do? I know the answer, but for the benefit of our audience.
Yeah, Venk Varadan, co-founder and CEO of Nanowear. We're a healthcare at home digital diagnostics platform using a proprietary wearable founded on our invention of what we call cloth nanotechnology or textile-based nanotechnology. It is the first and only cloth or textile sensor in the world that has been approved by FDA for capture and transmission of essential performance biomarkers. Because of that cleanliness of the signal that we have with these billions of touch points, as well as the volume of data that we're capturing off the body every millisecond around the cardiopulmonary complex, you start to become a multi-channel data story, which I know we'll touch upon. And obviously, if you've got super clean data and a lot of it in a closed source system, you can start to do some very cool things with machine learning and AI for diagnostics. So we're very recently commercial, having been 9 years in. It's been a very exciting year for us following our 4th FDA approval, which was our first AI diagnostic in hypertension.
Congratulations. Okay, so for a little background for you, you've been at this 9 years. I assumed, like, as a child in kindergarten, you always said, I want to work on cloth-based sensors. How does one get into this? I
love this story. This was not. I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid, obviously. But this invention of cloth nanotechnology, invented by our co-founder and chief innovation officer, who is my father, Dr. Venk Varadan, 40-plus year academic researcher in the U.S., really big focus on nanotechnology for defense-related applications. So if you think about what nanotechnology can do, it's lacing billions of sensors on a very small footprint. So his first applications were all in hard-to-detect environments from the defense industry. So if you think about a submarine, at a certain depth in the water, the sonar is incapable of differentiating between minute differences in sonar signals. So you can't differentiate between like a whale or a school of fish, a thermal geyser from the ocean floor, or a Russian sub, right? But you can't make the hull of the submarine bigger with more sensors because it won't swim properly, right? But if you lace the hull with nanosensors that are sonar enabled, now you've got billions of touch points that are capturing these little differences and reverberations of sonar, so you can detect, is this a Russian Akula sub or is this a whale? We did that with high altitude aircraft as well, where also a hard to detect environment. And so the thesis was the human body is a very hard to detect environment too. There's a lot of talking going on. If you're trying to understand diagnostic capabilities, could we apply that same concept of nanotechnology to human body sensors? Of course, you can't use carbon nanotechnology because that's corrosive to the skin. So the form factor of textiles or cloth resulted off of many years of work. While we are 9 years old, and it sounds like we've been at this a long time, our co-founder and my father and our founding engineers, who were his former master's students, they were working on this for a good decade before this, from government, NIH, DARPA, and DoD funding.
So the concept is, instead of like we have one microphone here grabbing it, instead we have thousands of ambient mini microphones and some really sophisticated software, billions kind of stitching together that data signal as opposed to one point.
Correct. And if you think about the value of that, especially as care goes more into the home and there's a push for real world evidence, you want something that can not only be self-administered at home, but is also really helping negate the aspects of false positives and false negatives, right? Because if you're diagnosing something at home, you better make sure that it is reliable. So the cleanliness of the signal and how we have to validate all of that are some novel processes that we obviously went through with our partners at FDA and obviously in the peer review community.
So this is really cool stuff. It's also probably high level for some people who aren't in cardiopulmonary, which is probably most of our audience. So tell us something, one of your milestones for this year, maybe the one you mentioned before, but what specifically can we do now in healthcare with diagnosis, monitoring, or treatment as a result of your breakthrough, your new milestone this year that we couldn't do a year ago?
Yeah, great question, Randy. I'm super proud to kind of say what that differentiation has become for us. I'll break it down in more layman's, right? When you go into your regular primary care visit or you're going to see a cardiologist, the first line diagnostic tools they're doing, decades old technology, right? Doctors touching your chest with a stethoscope to listen to your heart. Maybe doing electrocardiographs to understand the rhythm of your heart. Taking your blood pressure to understand the pressure in your vasculature. Checking your sort of lung volume, your breathing rate, your hemodynamics, your weight. These are all old tools that don't talk to each other. Think about that point quickly. They don't talk to each other. But Randy, your heart, Mike, your heart, my heart is talking to my lungs. It's talking to my hemodynamic system. It's talking to our vascular tissue system. So if you're not looking at all of those holistically in a time synchronous manner, you're never going to get to this sort of promise of individualized medicine or individualized healthcare that we really need to get to. I think a tool like ours, which was ambitious to say, hey, we want to combine all these tools together. There were a lot of people that were just like, just focus on one of these. Just focus on maybe two of these. Why are you going after all 8? Because you need that holistic aspect of how everything talks to each other. So I think from that standpoint, when I say cardiopulmonary, cardiometabolic, it's really tying in all of the systems that are relevant to our own individualized care. If all of us just got our blood pressure taken and it's all said we were 125/80, that does not suggest we're all at the exact same level of risk from a vascular complication. We need to tie that into the other aspects of data that's coming off of our body passively and in real world evidence, right? If we're constantly putting administering a cup, we know we're taking our blood pressure. So that's going to skew the results. It's got to be passive and sort of real world evidence.
So I'm hearing like the real Iron Man suit almost, right? This applications could be in Navy SEALs, performance, pilots, everything, longevity. I mean, metabolic health. I mean, just open us up to that vault of where you're going.
Yeah, I think the next 5 years from a digital standpoint are going to be really, really awesome. Mike, your point, as a startup, especially with really hard science, you never want to kind of take off that innovation and science hat. So you want to keep dreaming about applications, but obviously as a for-profit company, you do need to stay a little bit focused. And 9 years before being commercial, your shareholders are pretty patient, right? So you got to kind of prove out the business model and commercial standpoint, not the path of any entrepreneur, of course. But I've always thought that this is incredible technology for not only the performance aspect of our men and women on the battlefield, but what about their recovery from field to medevac to field hospital? We just don't have good tools there, right? And how much could we maybe understand and help those servicemen and women if we just detected something a few minutes earlier or something like that? I'd also say the applications are, all the way to, pediatric and infant care, which is a different regulatory milestone. But ultimately, if you think about where this can all go, I would hope that this becomes a part of early diagnosis and preventative care, because it's no secret we're continuing to get more unhealthy. Technology makes us more sedentary. Food is a bit weaponized in our country, at least in the US. And there is an aspect of needing to understand what's happening on the individualized level before you are noticing a chest pain or before you become too overweight or your BMI is high. A really perfect example of why I think that this may already be here, which is kind of this consumerization, democratization of healthcare, which is only going to be done with technology. If you think about the new GLP-1s, the injectables from pharma, I mean, there was a study published that in the next 5 years, they think maybe a third of America could be on that. And if you think about that, what is somebody going to want to do if they're paying many thousands of dollars for this treatment, right? Because they want to feel healthier, and we're in an Instagram generation and all of that. What are they going to want to do? They're going to want to understand, yes, I feel better, I'm losing weight, but I also want to know, what is this doing to my cardiometabolic assessment? So guess what? They may buy a continuous glucose monitor, which now has an over-the-counter indication, because they want to understand, how is this affecting my sugar levels? Is this reducing my hypertension? I would want a continuous blood pressure tool. Is this helping my arrhythmia? So I think what I see is patient empowerment to really drive early diagnosis and preventative care. It's not going to be us.
Yeah.
It's going to be the patient.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. So you started 10 years ago, and you're using sensors, smartphones, cloud, Bluetooth, AI through it. These technologies were all in completely different places 10 years ago.
Yeah.
To what extent can you say, oh yeah, we saw the future and started building now towards that? And to what extent have you just been jumping on it as you see it? Like, how far ahead can you see when you're thinking about this stuff?
That's a great question, and I'm smiling on the answer in the sense that there was a lot we didn't know. Let me be very clear when we got started. You know, our co-founder and chief innovation officer, Dr. Varadan, my father, he had this great idea of sensor technology. And so we were a little bit unique as entrepreneurs, sort of starting with this and like looking for the right problem to solve, right? Most entrepreneurs identify the problem, build technology around it. And I think the lucky benefit, the happy accident of us starting that way is that we had to start learning everything around the broader infrastructure, right? If we really were going to be a digital diagnostic platform, which required going through FDA, following cybersecurity protocols, following HIPAA, following you know, the industry standards, whether it's ISO, you know, 1345 in manufacturing or IEEE standards for hypertension. This was all stuff as engineers we had to imbibe, ingest, and adopt as we came on. And again, this was complicated for investors. They're like, are you a sensor company? Are you a hardware company? Are you a device company? Are you a software company? Are you an AI company? And our answer didn't please them, but it was, we're all of those things. And we have to be all of those things for this data and digital diagnostic story to work. Yeah. Which is finally being revelatory now, 9 years later.
What I love, Michael, about it is, you know, so many people talk about like, you can't start with the technology and then work backwards to the problem.
Well,
but actually, in a limited state, if you know where you're coming from, you actually can and do amazing things. It's just not the default that you're going to succeed. It's the default is you're going to fail, but you actually can succeed.
Yeah, and I think you also have to get a little bit lucky with timing, right? There are things we couldn't have predicted a global pandemic, which was kind of forcing healthcare into the home. We were doing all the same stuff, and nobody really cared. We didn't have all our approvals. We weren't in commercial market, but that's an example. Had there not been a smartphone with native apps, we wouldn't have been able to sort of do this in an outpatient or home-based setting, right? Everybody kind of says that there's technology literacy. I don't know anybody that doesn't have a smartphone, irrespective of socioeconomic status. Everybody's on TikTok, right? So, you know, I think the industry wins. We're the first to admit we got fortunate and lucky with, but I'd also just say that, you know, being first in healthcare, it's one of those industries where you want to be a fast second, right? Or maybe a fast third, because you need to look at what the struggles of others had. And I'll bring up a perfect example, right? Smartwatches were coming out like the early Fitbit, the early Apple Watch was right when we were starting. What was the biggest issue that we learned from that? Was battery life. How quickly does the battery drain because of all the functionality that it has? So we knew we had to tackle that up front because that's a patient safety and efficacy standpoint. That's an example of something that we saw before in our broader space that we knew was an agenda item we had to tackle.
So you're sort of immersed in cardio and pulmonary. It sounds like it's sort of two of the biggest domains. To your point about it not being about the technology, but being about the solution, how do you see where you guys do, what it fits into the larger impact of sort of software and micro sensors, AI, ML, into those as medical fields overall? Like, do you see, will they be completely different in 10 years? Or will they be more advanced but still the same? Or, you know, what are we looking at?
I think it's a great question. I think, and I want to be careful with what I'm saying here, it's a combination of new data sources that continue to bring more precision or individualized care or medicine to a patient. I said this earlier today, and I've been saying it. Think about combining, in the way Nanowear does, combining data continuously, from 8 first-line diagnostic tools, right? Now, time synchronously add continuous glucose monitor, which is a separate device, right? But make sure it's not being controlled by 2 different apps, because that won't work. Make sure it's going through the same system. What about pulse oxygenation? What about continuous weight? These are all health physiology and biomarkers. Guess what else you could add? purchasing data. Think about that. Think about that for a second. That's going to sound funny. I bet you could probably start identifying people that are at risk for cardiovascular disease just by looking at their Amazon Prime behavior.
Or my 7-Eleven rewards card.
100%.
Once in a while, I get Cheetos.
Your credit card purchasing on a Friday night, right?
Yeah.
How big is the wine bill,
Yeah.
right? I mean, again, if you can start tying all of these things
Yeah.
together, that's where I think this data story and
Yeah.
evidence story can go in
Really
healthcare.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome having you on. I saw you had a little speaker thing. You're here very immersed in this conference. What are you delighting in at the topics and speaking on? Tell us a little bit about what you're finding in this conference.
Yeah, Mike, I've been we've been Nanowear, we've been members of AdvaMed for 7 years now. So I've been coming to this conference since 2016. Super excited that we're here in Toronto. I love this city. But I think what I've been really excited about, I think this is the best conference in healthcare, in bringing in all the sort of device manufacturers, now investor community, sponsors, payers. But I think what's really exciting now is that digital isn't a buzzword anymore. Digital is part of everybody's 5-year plan. Everybody's 5-year plan at any part of the value chain in healthcare. And that from a content standpoint, it's not just to draw crowds that we're talking about AI, because everybody is trying to figure out AI.
Yeah.
And if you're figuring out AI, guess what else you have to figure out? You have to figure out data interoperability. You have to figure out data infrastructure. So those topics are becoming such a forefront as opposed to our traditional ones on how do we make regulatory more efficient and how do we tackle reimbursement. Digital is moving so much faster than I think we were prepared for. And it's become awesome that is priorities 1 through 10 for the stakeholders here.
Thanks for coming out.
Thanks,
And
guys.
I know you can't say anything because you're under regulations, but Venk's not under consideration as Taylor Swift's next opening act.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for
I
joining
can
us.
only be so lucky.
Awesome.